All right, guys, so we're going to do something a little different. Up until this point, we've been doing algorithms and testing algorithms that are just pure logic. There's no DOM elements or anything like that. But there's going to be times where, if you're doing front end web development, you're going to want to test DOM elements. So, what we're going to do is create a function called getElementsByTag where we can pass in a root element, whether that's a div or a UL or some kind of DOM element, and then also pass in a tag name that we're looking for, like a paragraph or a list item or whatever it might be. And we want to return an array of all the tags within that root. And in order to do this, in order to write tests using Jest, we're going to have to install an additional package where we can create mock elements to test, because we have no DOM, right? We're not dealing with any HTML files. This is just pure JavaScript. We're just using Node.js. So we're going to use something called Jest environment jsdom is the name of the package. So let's start off here by creating a new folder. We're going to call it getElementsByTag. And there is actually a method on the document object called getElementsByTagName, and that's kind of what we're doing here, is creating that from scratch. So in here, let's create getElementsByTag.js, and we're also going to add getElementsByTag.test.js. And I'm actually not going to do the tests first like I have been, just because this is a little more advanced, so I want you to at least know what the function is supposed to do. But again, you don't have to type this out, but let's say I have a div, and then in that div I have whatever, a paragraph, another paragraph, and then maybe, I don't know, a UL, and then another paragraph. Whoops. So what I want to do is be able to pass in the root, which would be this div, and then get an array of all the paragraphs, if that's what I pass in as a tag name. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So let's create a function, getElementsByTag, and it's going to get passed in a root. So in the example I just showed you, I would pass in that div, and then it's going to take in a tag name. In that example, I could pass in a paragraph or a UL, whatever it is that I'm looking for, and that should return an array of those elements. Now, if the root has the same tag as what we're looking for, like if it's a paragraph and we're looking for a paragraph, then root is going to get added to that array as well. Okay, but first let's just do some basic checks. So we're going to say if there's no root, so basically if we don't pass in a root, then we're just going to return an empty array. Okay, now if there's no tag name passed in, then we're just going to return an array with just the root. Okay, now we want to check to see if the root is the tag we're looking for, because again, if we pass in a div here and we're looking for a div tags, the root is still going to be part of that array. So we're going to first initialize a result array, and then let's do our check here. So we'll say if root.tagname. Now this is a DOM. This is a property that we can access on DOM elements in the document object model. So that's where we can get the root tag name, and I'm just going to make it lowercase. So let's say 2 lowercase. And we want to check to see if that's equal to the tag name that's passed into the function, which we also want to make 2 lowercase. Okay, if so, then we're going to take our result, not return, result, and we're going to push onto that array the root, because that is one of the tags we're looking for. All right. Let's just put a comment here. So this is if result is a tag we're looking for. Okay. Now we want to check to see if the root has child nodes. And like I just showed you, if we have a div and then we have a paragraph inside that div, this is a child node of this div. So we want to check for those. So let's say if the root, and then there's a method called has child nodes. All right, and we need the JSDom environment for these to work, right? Because these are all part of the document object model. So if it has child nodes, then I'm going to loop through. So we'll say for, and let's say let child of root, and then there's a children property. If you remember this back when we talked about the DOM way back in the course, there's a property called children. So we're going to basically loop through those and then set result equal to, and we're going to concat onto result. And inside here, we're actually going to run get elements by tag recursively. Recursive means we're running the function in the same function because we want to run this on each one of the children. So as the root, we're going to pass in the child, and as the tag name, we're going to pass in whatever this tag name is. Okay, and then those will get added to the result. So we'll have, if the root is a paragraph and we're looking for paragraphs, it'll get added. And then inside the root's children, if there's a paragraph, that will also get added. Then finally, we're just going to return the result. Okay, and then we're going to export. So module.exports, get elements by tag. All right, now to test this, like I said, we can't just do it as is. We have to add another package. So we're going to install that. So npm installs a dev dependency jest-environment-jsdom. Okay, because if you try to do this and then you try to create mock elements, like if you try to create a document object or whatever, it's not going to know what you're talking about. So in our package.json, we should see jest environment JSDOM. Now to use this, we actually have to add a configuration value, which is really simple. We're just going to go in the root here and create a jest.config.js file. Because you can use jest with no config like we've been doing, but there are configurations. Just like with Webpack, you can use it without configurations, but then you can create a Webpack config file to customize it more. Now all we have to do here is create an object called config and set the test environment. We want to set test environment to JSDOM. Okay, and then all we have to do is module.exports that config object. That's it. So now we should be able to use jest environment JSDOM. So now in our test, let's first bring in, let's say, get elements by tag, and we're going to bring that in from /get elements by tag. And then let's create our describe. And for that, we'll just say get elements by tag. Okay. So first off, let's do some simple stuff. Like we'll test if it's a function. So we'll say it should be a function. Okay. And then we want to expect, and we're going to check the type. So type of get elements by tag, and that should equal, so to equal a function. All right, I'm just going to make sure that everything's okay. So let's just run npm run test. Okay, so everything passes. You can see we have our get elements by tag here, which just has this one test, but it is passing. So it should also return an array because it's going to be an array of tags. So let's say it should return an array. So the way that we can do this is we can say expect array dot is array. Remember, that's how we can check if something is an array. and we're going to just surround our function name. And then let's see, actually we have to have our parentheses here, and then we want that to equal true, because that's what array.isArray returns, is true or false if it's an array or not. So let's run that. We'll just kind of run these one by one. All right, so everything passed, looks good. Now we also want it to return an empty array if no root is passed in, because that's how we set it up, right here. If there's no root passed in, then it should be, it should return an empty array. So let's just grab that, space these out a little bit. All right, so let's say if, or it should return an empty array if no root is passed in. All right, so to do this, we're going to just start this over. So expect. So we're going to expect, and I'm just going to pass in here, get elements by tag, and I'm not going to pass in anything. I'm not going to pass in a root. And then that should equal, so to equal, just an empty array. Okay, let's run that test. So that passed. Now we're going to get into using jsdom, because up to this point we've just been, doing the same kind of tests that we've been doing. So now let's say it, and for this I want to say should return only the root element if no tag name is passed in. So now what we're testing is this right here. If there's no tag name passed in, it's going to be an array with just the root element. So in order to do that, we have to create an element. So we can do that by, let's create a variable called root, and now we can say document.create element. So what we're doing is creating mock elements. Obviously we have no real front end, so we're not really, I know we're creating something here, but this wouldn't be available without the jsdom environment. This would give us an error because it wouldn't know what document is. We're in Node.js, we're not, there is no document, we're not in the browser. But that jsdom allows us to mock elements. So now let's say expect, and we can say get elements by tag, and we're going to pass in the root element, which is just a div, and then that should equal, so let's say to equal an array with just that root element. So let's try that out. And that works. Okay, so now for the big test is to see if it returns the correct elements, which are going to be the child tag, or the child elements or tag names, whatever you want to call it. So let's say it, and then should return, let's say should return the correct elements. So for this, we have to mock some more DOM nodes. So let's create the root. We'll say const root equals document.create create element, and we're going to create a div, and then let's add some child nodes, or we'll say child elements to the root. So we can do that. Let's say const p1, so we'll add some paragraphs. So p1 equals document.create element, and we're going to create a paragraph. Then we'll do another one. Let's call this one p2, and then we'll add a span as well, so we won't just have paragraphs. So let's say span, set that to document.create element. We're going to create a span, Okay, now what we want to do is append these. So let's say root dot append child. Again, we have access to these because of the jsdom environment. So I'm going to append P1. Then I'm going to append the span. And then I'm actually going to append onto the span. So in the span, I'll append the paragraph 2. Okay, because even if it's in another child, right? So even if we have a div with a paragraph with a span in that and then a paragraph in the span, both that paragraph should also be added to the array. So it's going to check all levels. All right, now let's create a result and say get elements by tag. We're going to pass in root, which is this right here, which is the div, and the div has inside of it the paragraph, span, and then the second paragraph. And we want to search for paragraphs. That's what we want to return. So we can then test that by saying expect the result to equal an array with paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. That's what we should get. So let's save that. Let's run our test. And it passed. All right. So just to kind of reiterate, we have no document, right? There's no real document here. We're just working with Node.js, but we added the jsdom environment, which allows us to do stuff like this, to use the document object to mock elements, create basically fake div elements, and append these elements to each other and basically create an HTML structure. And then we were able to create this get elements by tag where we pass in an element, which is the root, and then we want to look for some kind of tag, in this case a paragraph, and it will return an array of those nodes or of those elements. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Now in the next video we're gonna still use the jsdom environment, but we're gonna have a function that will get duplicate IDs from a root element, which is actually pretty helpful because you shouldn't have two of the same ID in any HTML file. So it's something you could actually use. So we're going to do that next.